Hi, this is Evelyn, and you are listening to Two Broads Talking Politics.
Are you la la listening? He just repeated the words that came out of her mouth. Now they're la la listening.
Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and I'm on with my co-host Sophie in snowy Madison, Wisconsin. Hi, Sophie.
Hey!
And we are thrilled to be joined today by Commissioner Bridget Gainer, who is a commissioner in Cook County, Illinois, where I live. Hello, Commissioner Gainer.
Hello. Great to be with you guys.
Yeah, so we are so excited to talk to you. I feel like I have been in rooms with you many, many times now over the past year or two in Chicago political things, but it's great to actually get to talk to you. So maybe just as a very brief intro, could you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in politics?
Sure. So I'm a Chicago native, grew up on the Southwest Side, has always come from a neighborhood where people think about politics all the time, even if they don't think they're thinking about it. So it's kind of in the water. And was always kind of involved in, voter registration and campaigns. And when I went to U of I, and when I got out of college, I joined a lay volunteer program where we lived in community, and I was trained as a community organizer by an order of nuns, and was trained really to think about how do you bring lots of different people together to move forward in common cause and make big changes into the things we don't think are right with the world. So we worked a lot on juvenile justice issues, kids being incarcerated, and also even things that are more straightforward, like how do you give neighborhoods access to their public school after 3 o'clock because it's safe and set up for after school, and how do you do that? So, organizing is really the fundamentals of everything. Much later, when I went to business school, it was actually the same ideas, just a different language. It was about economics and not about social movements, but it's all about understanding what motivates people and how to come together and, join together and actually be effective in making change. So that really brought me to politics, and working on the county board and local government has been a tremendous way to change some of the things I don't like about the way the world works. And join together with other people to do it. So I've loved it.
So tell us a little bit about what a county commissioner does. And I should remind people, Cook County, of course, is one of the biggest counties, most populous counties in the country. But what is that role? I think this is the kind of role that a lot of people never think about, except, every couple of years when they're voting and go, oh, yeah, what's that thing I'm voting for? So what is this role? What are the things you do on sort of a day-to-day basis?
So the county has the responsibility for three, big buckets of responsibility. One is the public health system. So we run a hospital and 16 clinics and provide clinical care really to everyone, regardless of your ability to pay. Two, we run the whole non-police side of the criminal justice system. So the courts, the sheriff's office, the public defender, the state's attorney, everything that happens after an arrest. And the third is we collect all the taxes and remit them then on behalf of all the city, the school districts, the park districts, and they also run the forest preserve. So it's 4 pretty important functions, and those are pretty much what counties do in every county in the country. So cities tend to do schools, police, fire, parks, roads, and the counties do courts and public health and the things I talked about before. So it's a division of labor and a separation of duties.
So, I think a lot of people, when they think about Illinois politics, think about things like corruption and, things like that. There's, of course, wonderful, wonderful things in Illinois politics as well. But one of the things that you have taken on since you became commissioner is really trying to sort of, make things cleaner and more transparent. I know, especially with things like the pension system. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that is important to you?
Sure. So the pension system is one of those parts of government that's hugely important, both to the people that are going to receive the pension, because it's how they're going to support themselves when they're old, but also the taxpayers, because it's a big part of the budget for the city, the county, and the state. But it's really hard to understand because the math is done by actuaries, which, most people with a gun to their head are like, I kind of know that has to do with math, but I'm not really sure what it means. And, the thing about pensions is that the premise is pretty simple. Defined benefit pension. You contribute while you're working. When you retire, you get a certain amount of money until you die. And so you're secure. And the problem, so they were devised at, in the really like the 40s and 50s. And it's interesting because in the United States, they're really through your employer. In Europe, it tends to be through the government, but in the U.S., it's really through your employer. And so as time marched on, different things changed about, people live a lot longer. They used to expect people to die, especially men, in their mid 70s, and now people are living well into their mid 80s. And so it puts stress on that system. Attributes of the system like, a cost of living increase that compounds every year, that makes it harder to support. I think the premise of pensions is still a defined benefit pension, really, really, really important, because most people are not set up and equipped to invest money and make investment decisions throughout their life. That's not what they do all day. And so we're really putting ourselves at risk. And I think one of the things we have to be concerned about long term is what's going to happen when people retire with a 401k, and the average 401k in this country is, $55,000. So that's going to be tough. But I think those things, while they're arcane and can make people's eyes glaze over, they're incredibly important, because government has to be sustainable. We have to take care of people, but we have to do it in a way that doesn't start to make people feel like, hey, this is chaos and no one's in charge. And so opening up, I always think when you tell people all the facts and just put it all out there, then you can say, hey, we're all in this together. I'm not trying to hide anything from you. That's always been my way of thinking about it.
So can you tell us a little bit about Cause the Effect Chicago?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So in 2016, maybe the end of 2015. No, definitely 2015. What am I saying? I was at an event and I heard Senator Kirsten Gillibrand talk about an organization she had started called Off the Sidelines. And it seemed to me so straightforward, which is women, are often on the sidelines when it really comes to either political power or corporate power. And how do we change that? And part of it is just not being an observer, being an actor and a principal. So I met her, I was impressed with her, and I thought we should do that here because, it's hard to remember, but before Trump and Hillary and all of that started, there wasn't as much focus on women running for office and how do you push them forward. And it was just something that was not really a part of the discussion. And so we started an organization and we started talking to young women and talked about why don't you, push for the next job, run for office, go for the leadership of an organization, and how do we support each other to do that? And we started talking about a whole range of things. What's the status of women in the jail? Is that really fair? Is it, what happens when you have a young children and you go to jail? What happens to them? How do you help? A lot of women I talked to really cared about that issue. They had no way of knowing how to actually influence it. We talked about pension stuff. I mean, this is part of where, when we did the website on pensions and talking about it, you got to create the opportunity for people to influence their own government. And so we just started these small, every month we did a lunch, and 20 people would show up, and it would be on a different topic, and they'd meet each other and they'd meet other people who cared about an issue. And we usually had someone there who was running an organization that actually was useful about the issue. And they'd get connected, they'd join it, and then, they'd start to actually make change. And that was the part, to me, it was really as simple as how do you connect people because they're just looking for a way in. And it grew, and finally we had like hundreds of people involved, and so said we got to bring people together. And so we started this operation, this conference called the Young Feminist Conference. And so this is our fourth year, and interestingly, the landscape has gotten both better and worse. On the one hand, it's better because I think that there's a lot more focus on women running for office and women's advocacy, and you start to see it with young women. There's multiple organizations that have launched since we launched Cause the Effect. But it's also worse. In some ways, I think that the rhetoric around issues for women, all of the regulations and laws that are being passed to limit women's access to reproductive health care, I feel like we are going backwards in a way in this country around women's issues, so the need to be organized is even greater.
You mentioned right before we started recording that, women, young girls, weren't always comfortable talking about being feminists. And so this is the Young Feminist Conference, and that's something you're leaning into. And I've found that throughout my life. I think maybe now people are finally more open saying, yes, I'm a feminist. But, what are you hearing from young girls? What is their understanding of sort of where women are and what they need to be thinking about?
Well, that was a surprise to me I have a 15-year-old daughter, so she was only like 12 at the time we launched the conference. And these young women, high school girls and college, said, well, I mean, I'm not going to, I believe all this, but I'm not feminist because, I'm not a crazy person. I'm not like a radical. And I would tell them, feminism just means equality, just means you think you're equal to men. But it's a way that the word had been captured by people who wanted to, who don't have an interest in women being equal. And, and I remind women about this all the time in politics, especially, as Democrats and as someone who occupies, a left of center position. Just because someone's happy to, let you have an abortion or doesn't care about, is open-minded when it comes to immigration, that doesn't mean that they want your economic equality, because now you're starting to compete with them. And it's like, whoa, step back, and for a lot of time, most of the people in power in this country really only had to compete with other men, usually other white men. And now we're coming into a world in which people are saying, that's not okay with me. Everyone should be able to compete. And all we're talking about when you talk about whether it's diversity or inclusion or feminism or equality or equity, it's just leveling the playing field. And that, for me, and in most cases, it doesn't mean giving people extra things. It means removing the barriers that got in their way. And then they get to walk through the door by themselves. And so that is what I really want to help these young girls say out loud, be in a room with 200 other women and especially young women. When they say this and everyone's nodding their head and they're like, oh, okay, great. I'm not alone in thinking this. That is what I think. And it just, to know that you think something and you believe it. And by the way, lots of other people do too. That really gives you strength to keep pushing, especially when it feels really lonesome.
Cook County is, of course, a very diverse place, and I think a lot of us who are feminists, who are white, worry sometimes about being very intentionally inclusive. And I know that's something you've thought about with that conference. Yep. Can you talk about how you work to make sure that this is really an inclusive environment?
Look, I think about that a lot, and I think about what's the difference, what does true equity mean? Equity does not mean hanging out a shingle that says, you're welcome to come in. I hope you can figure it out. No, equity means how am I being really thoughtful about what's getting in people's way about being able to achieve that equity? And whether it's a job, whether it's, I work a lot around economic development in low-income communities. How do you make sure that the doorway to get in to prove yourself isn't impossible to find, impossible for you to get through? The requirements to get through that door have nothing to do with the skills required to be successful. And so what I try to think about all the time is, one of the things I've done since I've been at the county is to start the Cook County Land Bank. And after the financial crisis, there was tons of vacancy in a lot of communities that were otherwise really attractive, but just got stuck in this mire of court and foreclosure and the banks. And so we started looking around, and I thought, these neighborhoods are attractive to people. Why aren't people buying? And what we found is it wasn't about people wanting money to do the development. It was that you had to spend a year in court, and you didn't know what was going to come out at the end. Were you going to have a water bill or a lien or a fine? And so the uncertainty was so great that unless you could hire a lawyer and navigate that system, you didn't get access. Well, so we thought, okay, well, what if we do that? Because there's a skill set involved in rehabbing a vacant home. And then there's a totally unrelated skill set around having enough money to hire a lawyer and navigate court and spend a year and be willing to take, some economic hits at the end of it. Those have nothing to do with one another. And so what if we just decoupled those things, and we went in and we cleared the title and cleared the taxes and made it just a house to purchase and to rehab and to sell? Well, look, 5 years later, next week we're going to close on our 500th rehab. But as important, if not more, and every one of those is in a formerly often a house that was vacant for years in neighborhoods that saw a lot of tumult during the financial crisis. But the interesting thing is the vast majority, 320 of our 400 developers are African American or Latino, and our fastest growing group of developers are African American women, because you eliminated this barrier of court and lawyers and special knowledge about the legal system that had nothing to do with your ability to like buy a home, rehab it, pick great design, sell it. And now people are having success, and they're getting an equal chance at that economic option and that economic benefit, because what you did is you eliminated the barriers. No one needed saving. What they needed was to get barriers. And one of the things I tell my kids all the time is like, look, racism and sexism and the ills that it has created, it's not your fault. It doesn't mean it's not your responsibility to do something about it. And eliminating barriers is what is our responsibility. And so I think as women who are white and who have access to any number of tools, that's your job.
I'm wondering, if people often think if you want to make change, especially if for women and girls, things about gender, that you need to think about federal legislation and federal positions, Congress, Senate. But I think what you're telling us is that you can really make a big difference at a much more local level. So what are sort of your recommendations for women who are listening to this, who've been thinking about politics, don't really know how to get in? What are some of the things that they can and should be thinking about beyond just like, okay, I'm going to run for Congress next year?
Well, that's a great question, because everyone wants to go for the glamour job. Not that maybe being in Congress right now maybe isn't a glamour job, but I love local government. It is you're close to the ground. You know exactly. You have such a better sense of what people, where the holes are, what people need, what they want, and you have access to the power structure. And I could have never formed the Cook County Land Bank, and now we're 5 years old. We made $16 million last year. We're a totally independent social enterprise. We're connected to the county, but I could not have done that from the outside. You have access. I could pass an ordinance. I can engage the city and the county, and so what you want to say is, like, if you really feel compelled by social change, local government is a tremendous option. And, to some degree, our politics has become incredibly toxic with the press and Twitter and, so much distraction that, to me, the return on investment of my time versus impact is so much greater at the local level. Really, it is. And I'm, if any of your listeners are, want to talk further about that, I'm always open, because we need really good, smart people. And look, not all of it is, like I said, it's not all glamorous and exciting, and you're not going to be reading about yourself in the paper all the time, but you are going to be getting things done. And that, to me, has been deeply satisfying.
So if people want to get involved with Cause the Effect, how do they do that?
Well, good news. So first of all, you can just go to causetheeffectchicago.org and see what we have going on. But November 9th, we are having our Young Feminist Conference at the Merchandise Mart, and it's been planned by about 10 or 12 of these young women in high school at a variety of high schools all over Chicago. We pulled together a couple hundred young women, and I will tell you, it's an incredibly diverse group of people, geographically, racially, socioeconomic status, and, people are coming together, and we're talking about everything from, who do you really want for 2020? Like, should we default to a female candidate? Who's really talking about our needs? Where do you get your news from? Like, is it only from Twitter and social media? Do you read a paper? We have a couple journalists on. We're talking about, things like, the dress codes at schools. How is that, how do you navigate that as a young woman in a school? Cyberbullying, like sexual harassment, pay equity. There's all of these topics that they get to come and really have it out with some older women who've been around and experienced and have life experience and work experience to talk about it. But they are mostly running the show, and it's hugely interesting. So if anyone wants to come, we have people from, 15 to 80 who come to the conference, and I love that part of it. But if you have any young women in your life who are teenagers, and it's an incredible place for them to come, because they're the majority, and they're talking about things that I think they often don't talk about at school.
Excellent. I am super excited. This will be my first time attending, and
Great.
I can't wait.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'll be in lots of rooms with you, and I'll make sure to actually introduce myself.
Please do.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.